Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. It's really, I always think about how, like, with everything you could possibly do with this hour, it's really, it's such a gift that you decided to spend it here. So my name is Lauren Corfine, and I am a very grateful alumna of the College of Human Ecology, Human Development and Family Studies, class of 1991. And currently, I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology and a Dean's Fellow for Undergraduate Affairs in Human Ecology. And I am beyond delighted for the opportunity to introduce Kathleen McCormick. Kathleen is also an alumna of Cornell's Human Development Department, receiving her bachelor's degree in 2016, just a moment or two after me. She then worked in the Women's Hormones and Aging Research Program at Brigham and Women's Hospital, part of Harvard Medical School, from 2016 to 2018, and served as project manager in the Youth Emotion Development and Intervention Lab at the University of Illinois from 2018 to 2020. She is currently a PhD candidate studying human development in the College of Human Ecology, her original academic home, with the wonderful mentorship of Professor Jane Mendel. Her research focuses on reproductive transitions for women and female-bodied people across the lifespan, with a particular focus on the psychological, biological, and hormonal changes that occur across the menstrual cycle and throughout puberty, pregnancy, and menopause. Kathleen's work tries to understand the ways in which women's mental health is impacted by their embodied development across the lifespan, embedded within the social and historical contexts in which they live. Her scholarship also examines the historical context in which research itself occurs, considering the ways in which social and cultural values change and how those changes impact what research questions are being asked, how they're being asked, and how funding patterns and other patterns impact who actually gets to ask them. Kathleen is deeply passionate about the field of human development. She was the 2023 recipient of the Graduate Summer Archival Research Fellowship, and the work she did on that fellowship greatly informs what she's going to speak with us about today. Having known and worked with Kathleen for several years, I believe that she is a product of the rich intellectual tradition of the discipline of human development. And with her passion and her dedication to the core values and methods and scholarship of human development, I have no doubt that she will also be at the forefront of carrying it to wherever it's going to go next. So speaking with us today about growing pains, the history of human development and the future of the field, it is my tremendous honor to introduce Kathleen McCormick.
Thank you, Lauren, for such a generous introduction. One of my great regrets is that I didn't get to have you as an instructor in undergraduate because you weren't here yet. But one of my greatest joys is that I get to be with Lauren and learning from Lauren today. So I'm actually going to start today with a little more of my own personal history. This is my freshman year roster picture from the track and field team. I have a very deeply felt and personal history with home economics, human ecology, and human development. I'll also loudly and proudly state that I am a human developmentalist at my core. It is in what I do and how I see the world and how I see research. Although my work is rooted in developmental psychology, the lens that I look at mental health and well-being across the lifespan is fundamentally informed by my education in a human development department. However, like many people, and perhaps like some undergraduates here right now, I started out as a high school student who wanted to study psychology, but at a state school price. I'm seeing some nods. This led me to Cornell's College of Human Ecology, where I started studying, as Lauren mentioned, human development in 2012. And I fell in love with human development quickly and have remained so ever since. As an HD major, I also spent a lot of time in Martha Van Rensselaer Hall, even though I still struggle to spell Rensselaer. which is where I first encountered this photograph. As I walked by every day, MVR BO1 Hall. Frankly, I was surprised to see Eleanor Roosevelt there, and I was even more surprised to see her modeling. It was her inauguration dress that she modeled for students during Farm and Home Week at Cornell, and then later donated very generously to Cornell's costume and textile collection. I was fascinated by the photograph and the intersection of the college with such a major historical figure. And I was spurred by Roosevelt's support of the college in its early years and her belief that human ecology, home economics was the most important part of the university for its concerns of the homes and of the people of this country. We need to know more about how to live to the best advantage, how to use what we have, and to know what to strive for. As I continued my undergraduate studies, I realized the important role Cornell professors and students in College of Home Economics played as major historical figures, shaping science and public policy at Cornell, across the US, and across the globe. This experience as an undergraduate laid the foundation for my scientific pursuits, trying to tie together my love of developmental psychology and my passion for history. I also learned that I had a lot in common with Martha Van Rensselaer herself, who, in a description discovered after her death, reflected on her own shortcomings and strengths. And she said she could work well only when interested. Unfortunately, as I discovered in my freshman stats class, that is also something I struggle with. Much better at stats now, don't worry. She also believed in the power of scholarship and advocacy. Last summer, through the generous Archival Fellowship, I was able to tie my love of history, finally, with my passion for human development, and frankly, channel my frustration with the loss of my departmental identity in the merger with psychology. As I'll talk about, I believe that human development matters in its name and in its practice. And as I dove into the archives and explored the complex history of human development and home economics, I reaffirmed this belief and was able to define more clearly for myself, and hopefully for others, the unique scholarship and lens that makes human development research different from other fields, as well as essential for scholars to tackle the problems of the present. My hope is that I can give a little bit back to a field that's given so much to me. So to give a very brief overview, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of home economics and how it transformed into human ecology. To understand the history of human development, its importance for developmental researchers, it's really important to understand the history of home economics in the programs and departments that can be considered offshoots, and I'll term as offshoots of home economics. In particular, I'll discuss how the post-war period, the post-World War II period, redefined the field of home economics and these offshoots. And finally, I'll discuss lessons learned from studying history of the field and opportunities for human development researchers. But I'll also start, and I especially know there are some people here who their first interaction with home economics might be their middle school class. I'd be remiss in not starting this talk with an acknowledgement that most people don't think of it as a field of study when they hear home economics. Instead, most often, home economics brings to mind a class taken in middle school or high school that taught cooking or how to balance a budget, or, according to my partner, the cool dragon print laundry bag I made in class when I was in middle school. I just want to know, there's no photographic evidence of this bag, so it's just hearsay that it's cool. But I think a lot of, although these classes actually are very important and one result of home economics extension work, these classes and their often cartoonish depictions are actually quite different than the academic work that went on in home economics. It looked a lot more like this. The origins of these types of research and the teaching opportunities came from the Morrill Act of 1862, which provided the foundations for the development of home economics programs in the US. Established to support growing movements to advance agricultural and industrial development, these schools provided the opportunity for the industrial class, which encompassed white farmers and working people who had previously been excluded from higher education. Women at land-grant institutions were granted entry into new scientific endeavors aimed at various aspects of home and family life, including child rearing. The aims and professional identity of home economists were further established at the Lake Placid conferences between 1899 and 1909, with the stated goals of improving homes and communities through research and advocacy. In contrast to other departments across universities in the early 20th century, these home economics, domestic science, and child development colleges and departments were made up of women. As with all sciences, domestic science was often influenced by political goals and was, in this period, in a state of flux, as conceptions of women's roles and aims of domestic science were evolving. Although the goals of these programs were centered around bettering home and family life, the work often overlapped with psychology, education, food chemistry, and other related disciplines. However, in contrast to other fields, domestic science and home economics departments were a unique place for a scientific career in female-led work and opened academia to the working class and rural white women, as well as later Black women and women of color. In programs across the country, women were encouraged to undertake and invest in scientific pursuits as long as they remained connected to child development and domestic life. And the presence of women in home economics accelerated social progress by providing new opportunities and exposure across academia to individuals who had previously been unseen and unheard. Home economics, like many fields in the 19th and 20th century, originally included many structural barriers for non-white scholars and students. Yet these academic departments and colleges also became places of opportunity as Black scholars, like those at Hampton University in North Carolina and other HBCUs, successfully pushed for more representation in the field in spite of social movements that either implicitly or explicitly excluded Black women, women of color, and home economics. An echoing theme we see in home economics the 20th century was this push and pull within a field that sought to expand women's roles, education, and opportunity, while also reinforcing to various degrees gender and racial stereotypes. Ultimately, I believe that the underlying strength in these departments was providing a proving ground where women were given time to learn, test scientific theories, and create a pathway to study subjects ignored by traditional science departments. Given the groundbreaking nature of home economics programs and developmental programs and the makeup of the faculty, it's perhaps unsurprising that researchers conducted work that was fundamentally different in scope, and it's fundamentally different in its lens than male-dominated departments. Coursework in home economics encompassed psychology, education, nutrition, chemistry, as well as many other subjects to provide students with an interdisciplinary background, and was organized around topics and problems rather than by discipline. I realize this is a little bit hard to see, but you can see here on the right, this is kind of the course, what you would expect for the first 4 years, or for the 5 years of a student in nursery school or nursery school teaching. You can see social science, human growth and development, gym, of course, personality development, nature study. We also see educational psychology, family nutrition, a variety of different topics that were designed to strengthen someone's understanding to pursue a nursery school teaching job. And as early as 1929, home economics researchers were also grappling with the role of context on children's well-being. Prefiguring Uri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model, early home economics departments were hubs for theorizing and developing new theories about the developing methods that combine the theoretical influences of early developmentalists, nutritionists, and biologists. On the left, we see a summary of a research proposal in 1929 by Martha Van Rensselaer, Helen Cannon, and Dwight Sanderson that highlighted the need to capture environmental influences such as a family's education, religion, recreational activities, household management, mobility, and local cultures and mores. I see Amrit. I also was kind of blown away by this when I saw it first. I'll talk about this later. Uri Bronfenbrenner is this monumental figure, and his work is so wonderful. And to see some kind of early action in this wonderful and influential area in 1929 by home economists, this one I always struggle with, it's the worst one for a talk, is really impressive and kind of wild to me. Without needing to respect the usual academic boundaries of traditional fields, multidisciplinary researchers were allowed to flourish, albeit receiving limited acknowledgments from the same scholars who influenced the researchers within home economics. Here are some titles. Obviously, they didn't have paper this white back then. But you can see from various scholars in home economics, especially our very own Fleming Cottrell, Helen Monch, and Ethel Waring, and many others. This one is my personal favorite, by the way, to study ultraviolet irradiation on a group of preschool children. So what I found is that they had some, Zoe, do you want to do this kind of research? They had set it up so half of the children would play under ultraviolet radiation for a period of time, while the other children wouldn't. Everything else was the same. They didn't find a difference between groups in how many sick days they had, and I didn't hear anything about long-term follow-up. But this was my favorite, and you can actually read this paper. You can look it up on Google Scholar. And here we have an early, like the nursery school students, they were collecting really fantastic data. Some things that we probably don't think of. They were looking at wind direction and velocity and nap time. They were collecting so much data on these students and bringing them in every morning, unfortunately, sometimes for a rectal thermometer. But these were generally positive experiences that the kids had, and I would like to believe. Here I'm editorializing, but also really rich data for so many researchers. Still, in contrast with this tapestry of women-led work, even in progressive co-educational schools like Cornell, students were not required to take courses taught by women, reflecting an environment of unidirectional influence in the first half of the 1900s. We have here a letter from Jacob Sherman, the president, written in 1914. Corey, if I'm wrong, don't tell me. He writes, if therefore a woman were appointed an assistant professor or full professor with a right to a seat in the faculty, I would have her appointed in a department in which her work would not be prescribed for any class of students. I would not compel men to attend her course, nor for that matter would I compel women, but I would leave it open to them all alike. What I find hard and complicated and interesting about this is we have so many experiences of progressive education at Cornell and wonderful opportunities for women, but it is still very much a product of their time, and not trying to compel anyone to learn from a woman. Luckily, I've captured you all here today, so you'll at least have to learn from me. And I'll quickly note here that many of the pictures and quotations I'm sharing today are from my work in the archives, but this comes from a wonderful digital collection or exhibition created in 2001 by Joan Brumberg and the students from a human development class, and it was curated by Eileen Keating. It is a wonderful resource that I learned a great deal from, and I highly recommend. So in the post-war period, although many scientific fields were transformed in the aftermath of the Second World War, home economics departments were particularly touched by the social and political environment in America due to the composition of their students and faculty and dependency on funding from the state. I will also note here that no one has yet produced a compelling home economics Oppenheimer-style biopic. And that's particularly rich terrain, I think, and it is open to any film producers. Free idea. Instead of reflecting a progressive vision of women in science, many initiatives in research and teaching during the post-war period amplified messages that women belonged in homes. In conjunction with the firing of women workers in factories and the closure of the Lanham Act child care centers in the post-war period, home economics and child development departments increasingly, and it sometimes contradictorily, emphasize women's roles at home. This was not a new problem from home economics or the women in these departments. While home economics spurred women's progress in educational and scientific spaces, it could both help and harm women. It highlighted the role and importance of women's domestic work, allowing for increased attention to the expertise and labor that took place. However, some home economics researchers could embody the good for thee but not for me mentality, as experts in the field advocated for women's roles in the home, while also trying to increase the number of home economics graduates in professional spaces. We can see here Cornell grappling with some of these contradictions. And to summarize this from the archives, Mrs. Spalding brought up the problems growing out of the need for more and more families to have two salaries. She spoke of recent studies of emotionally disturbed children and children suffering from ulcers, which showed that in many cases, the cause could be traced to the lack of the mother in the home. Mother blaming. Since this will undoubtedly come to the fore in the near future, she wondered if we are anticipating how to meet this. Flora Rose notably tried to reconcile some of these by describing home economics work as a three-edged tool that could help a home economics graduate earn a living before marriage, help her in the home, and give her a background contributing to outside of the home when her children had grown. And undoubtedly this is true. But similarly notable home economists, Flemmy Cottrell wrote, quote, "A woman should go no further in other fields than is possible while still doing a good job in the home. If women in any field don't do a good job as homemakers, they don't really make a lasting contribution to the world." I like to imagine her jetting off to another place across the country or the world while she was quoting this. We have these contradictions and we have to kind of sit with them. Although the field still conducted rigorous empirical work, the larger reputation of the discipline became enmeshed with these accusations that it limited women's agency and worked against feminist and progressive movements. Although, for sure, and certainly home economics actually helped many progressive and feminist movements, these accusations were not completely meritless and reflected fundamental disconnects between the lives and goals of academic scientists in home economics departments and the messages that were often taught in classrooms at both the collegiate level and in high school classrooms. These contradictions posed a challenge to the research and teaching environment for developmental scientists within these spaces. Combined with existing biases against women in science, this reputation reduced the research conducted in home economics schools and departments to that of housewives and mothers, ignoring the field's rich and complex history of interdisciplinary work and novel research. The reactionary work that became popularized in home economics led to a lasting and harmful reputation and led to pressured universities across the US to rename their colleges and departments in the second half of the 20th century. Popular choices for renaming included Human Development, which was almost the name of our college, Human Development and Family Studies, Consumer Sciences, and as we know, Human Ecology. In addition to the name changes, departments sought to bolster their reputation as hubs for applied research on the lifespan and recruited researchers who wished to conduct research that went beyond the lab. Administrators intentionally hired male faculty members and tried to increase the enrollment of male students in the newly renamed programs. This was best exemplified by the stark change in faculty and home economics programs at Pennsylvania State University and Cornell between 1965 and 1972, as historian Margaret Rossiter wrote. Although women were still in the majority of both graduate and professorial positions, the percentage of women faculty were still in the majority of both graduate and professorial levels, the percentage of women faculty members dropped by 30% at Penn State and 20% at Cornell. Unsurprisingly, the increased recruitment of male faculty led to an increased prestige in the field relative to early 20th century. As Cornell historian Margaret Rossiter highlighted, quote, "Men's greatest inroads to the field of home economics concentrated in one area, child development and family relationships. 2/3 of all of the men earning PhDs in home economics were in developmental research." Uri Bronfenbrenner, perhaps the most prominent researcher within human development, popularized many of the core values of home economics research in his work and in his founding of the Head Start program, in the US. In emphasizing the importance of public policy in multiple contexts across the lifespan, Bronfenbrenner's work broke away from classic empirical methodologies, which he characterized as, quote, "the science of strange behavior of children in strange situations with strange adults for the briefest periods of time possible," unquote. Still true some places. This was rapidly adopted by psychologists as well as education and health researchers. Although Bronfenbrenner's influence of the field of human development is and was an unequivocal good, as someone has once noted, I am one of Bronfenbrenner's biggest fans. His fame and his acceptance within the development and family studies departments often ended up overlooking women researchers and policymakers who built the field's foundations. Notably, these changes in makeup of faculty transformed the departmental offshoots of home economics and opened the door for more professional marginalization in one's own department. In looking at the sex discrimination case from the late 1970s, we see a woman in human ecology, in home economics, suing the university. She worked according to the records in a, quote, "an atmosphere demeaning to women. The arrow in the logo of the plaintiff's sex equity project was compared by male faculty members to the male sex organ. Statements by male departmental faculty members included asking plaintiff why she wanted to pursue a career when she had a nice husband, children, and home, and why plaintiff employed men on her sex equity project. We see the fundamental issues in transforming departments based off of perceptions of prestige over the advocacy of women's scholarship and extension work. And in this way, we see that human development is defined and departmental offshoots of home economics have been defined by gender. I call this time is a flat circle, Exhibit A. Here we have, I'll get to that. Even in the 21st century, human development continues to carry the joint pride and burden of its origins in home economics and domestic science. The majority of students in human development and family studies programs today continue to be women. As historically domestic science was a place where women were both relegated as well as flourished, human development continues to be dominated by attitudes towards students majoring or taking coursework in human development. Departments frequently retain a reputation as a mom major, specifically geared towards women. And indeed, that was the case while I was here, when occasionally someone would tell me that I was taking the mommy major. One of the wonderful things I've heard from current students is that hasn't been their experience. I see you shaking your head, thank goodness. But it's still, in 2016, was the case. Indeed, Brofenbrenner once acknowledged this fact himself in an introductory course, a lecture for a course in human development, stating, quote, "It is true that we shall be dealing with a lot of babies and children." In that connection, I heard a student say the other day, "You know, I'd get a lot more out of that course if I were a woman." To which he responded, "Brother, it isn't worth it." He has the best quotes. Here we also see in 1914 from The Widow, Cornell Humorous Magazine, an article making fun of, that is admittedly funny, housewives and the work that was being done in the College of Home Economics. Of course, human development's reputation as for women is not isolated. Throughout academia, fields and subfields are often segregated by gender, with certain areas or topics defined as a woman's domain and others as men's. Subsequently, areas where women represent the majority often experience less prestige and pay inequity than comparable fields where men are the majority. Meanwhile, women have struggled to gain footing in fields where men are the majority and funding is greater, such as in neuroscience. Barriers for entry and equitable pay are even greater for women of color, dealing with unique racial and gender discrimination in science. Areas where women scholars are in the majority or studying issues typically are considered women's issues tend to be less well-funded, and researchers and practitioners are underpaid for their work in these domains. I'll shout out my mother as one example, someone in obstetrics and gynecology. Many years ago, when it was a male-dominated profession, it was one of the higher-paying specialties. Now, and in lockstep with the changes of composition, majority women, it's underpaid and underfunded relative to other fields. Consequent areas, indeed, much of the story of home economics in the post-war period is one of funding, as the American Home Economics Association attempted to source funding and make a case for the value of home economics work to Congress and to private funders. Taking this all together, consequently, the hiring of men to boost prestige could be seen as a logical choice by university administrators looking to increase the perceived reputation of research of a department or college. Similarly, renaming or redefining a department so that it's aligned with fields of higher perceived prestige can be seen as beneficial for the members of that department. Yet this can have the unintended effect of erasing the history of a discipline and making it harder to trace the intellectual roots of a field. Perhaps more importantly, these changes overlook the core problem of gender discrimination and the very factors that drive prestige. One of the things that felt like a double is when I was doing this research, at times it was hard to track women through the historical record because of their name changes. Similarly, when I first started the journey of learning what human development was, the frequency of name changes made it hard for me to even see where and when human development was human development and where the intellectual roots of the field were. But I want to talk a bit about the future of human development, or Time is a Flat Circle, Exhibit B. In the 1902 description of home economics, we see a lot of the same themes that we see in trying to describe and understand what human development is today. Home economics, in its most comprehensive sense, is the study of laws, conditions, principles, and ideals which are concerned on the one hand with man's immediate environment, and on the other hand with his nature as a social being. It is the study of the relationship between these two factors. It is a philosophical subject, something to connect and bind together into a whole, pieces of knowledge at present unrelated. And human development being as beyond description and explanation, what could be the best of being human. In very few fields resemble human development in possessing this kind of unified vision, even with definitional problems, improving human lives and strengthening families and communities. In contrast with this unified vision is this very difficulty in articulating what human development is. How can developmental scientists resolve this? Undeniably, this articulation problem is perhaps one of the greatest contributors to the valuation of the field and its students, in that it is often viewed or subsumed by psychology or other fields. Trying to find a simple explanation of what human development is frequently involves unpacking Russian nesting dolls of descriptions of other fields. An individual interested in exploring a degree or career in human development may search the internet to understand the field, only to end up on a psychology website grasping the basic idea of human development before being able to define it. I myself frequently struggle, and even after doing this project, in defining what is human development, and find myself going to descriptions of what human development majors can go on to do. Clarifying the field's definition is likely the most essential task for today's developmental academics. A second task lies in developmentalists recognizing and publicizing what their field already holds, that the field already holds solutions for some of the most pressing societal problems today, ranging from the child mental health crisis to healthcare inequities. These goals reflect, in recent decades, social science has moved away from simple explanatory variables towards an understanding of that human growth is altered by complex and interconnected systems that affect and are affected by individuals. This has occurred not just within developmental science, but in connected fields like psychology, sociology, public health, medicine, and others. Fields like psychology are further enriched by historical context, biological methods, and an understanding of public policy, evidenced by the fact that these courses all work together to help us understand the problems that we have. Similarly, medical research and epidemiology are made more comprehensive with the strength psychology brings in measuring human thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. In capitalizing on the different theoretical and methodological approaches, a variety of fields have been able to confront major methodological errors in their discipline through collaboration with scholars outside of their field. I myself have an example of this in a collaboration with physiologists within the School of Human Ecology. For years, psychologists have been studying reproductive hormones through saliva, and recently a paper was published reflecting on the last 10 years of salivary measurement. It's ultimately coming to the conclusion that it was not a reliable measure for reproductive hormones. When I took this to our physiologist collaborator, she said, well, of course, we would never use saliva. Goodbye 10 years of psychological research. In these collaborations, there's the growing acknowledgement that interdisciplinary research is often better and much less expensive research. Meanwhile, the cost of siloed research lies in stilted progress, methodological error, and grants that don't go nowhere. Interdisciplinary research promises the strength of collaboration between experts and the wisdom that comes from other disciplines' trial and error. In the absence of interdisciplinary spaces, researchers have to find collaborators and experts who are both motivated to learn and to collaborate across disciplines, rather than to reach across the hallway during a colloquium or departmental event. Rather than building new spaces and new opportunities for interdisciplinary work, One option would be for universities to capitalize on a department that historically woven together different disciplines for the common goal of improving human lives. The burden is not solely on universities to engage with developmental scientists, however. In order to build off the structural strengths and mission, human development should address critical barriers of the field. Part of acknowledging these barriers means that HD and HDFS departments need to name and explore the ways that sexism and structural misogyny have harmed the field and the goals of its scholars. Human development teaches students critical skills and introduces a lens to explore any problem that affects humans across the lifespan. Why are these skills pursued by more women than men? And how can the field support human development graduates as they enter the workforce? I think we have to ask ourselves, why does strengthening always come at the expense of women in women's spaces? Improving the reputation and the funding of the field requires investment by college and university administrators who are likely less familiar with the history of human development and home economics, human ecology, than they are of psychology, sociology, and biology. This discrepancy may compound existing definitional problems of human development programs. In order to invest in the future of the field, it is therefore necessary to be able to provide a clear story of where the field has come from and where it is headed. Investing in this future also requires recruitment of students and of members who should seek to engage with the public, so students' first interaction with the field doesn't come at freshman orientation or an information session. It is not followed by an internet search that yields little clarity on human development and the opportunities of the field. Even in trying to write my paper and trying to figure out where do human development majors go, where do HD and HDFS students go, it was nearly impossible to find information without trying to rename programs and do a whole group of scientific research questions myself. And I have very limited time. I'm a grad student. Oh, there we go. All right. We have this beautiful summary too from Betty Smith to Sally Blackwell. I feel that home economics is in danger of losing its identity at the university unless we move in the direction of strengthening our program by building out the basic areas. All is not dark in the future for home economics. A little dark now knowing that it's human ecology. If we do build, as I have indicated, home economics will emerge as an important segment of the university. It is in the unique position of being able to bridge the gap between basic disciplines and the individual. The opportunity is there. Let's take advantage of it. I'd like it to echo Betty Smith today. Although Uri Bronfenbrenner may be the father of human development, and a damn good one, the field has many unnamed and unrecognized mothers who ushered in an era of interdisciplinary social science. Figures such as Ethel Waring, Agnes Faye Morgan, Flemmie Cottrell were the bedrock of programs that were later lauded for their interdisciplinary approaches by men who came after them. Integral to human development and its antecedents, these figures were practically invisible in historical accounts of HDFS and child studies. I should say until recently, there's been a lot of wonderful work on Flemmie Cottrell recognizing her impact on the university. Moves to delegitimize the history of home economics and to reduce its cultural legacy to sexist tropes have largely been successful. Home economics calls to mind apron and sewing kits and occasionally dragon print laundry bags, rather than the policy and research-centered focus of the field that remains foundational to human development and family studies. As Joan Brumbrook has argued, this is consistent with attitudes in the characterization of women-dominated professions. It's not merely a historical artifact. Attitudes about home economics and its delegitimization serves as a cautionary tale for us and for human development and family studies departments. Issues of identity, purpose, perception persist and remain salient to human development. In order to promote interdisciplinary vision of human development, we should address the erasure that characterizes the past. The simplistic characterizations overlook a field with a rich history full of individuals devoted to its mission and the betterment of mankind. It's a straightforward mission statement which masks a bold, ebullient, and challenging goal. We have a rich history in human ecology and human development of interdisciplinary research. And this, of course, includes historians like Joan Jacobs Brumberg. This allows us to ask ourselves what we can learn from the past and how we can fight for a future where good science, teaching, and outreach is valued. in general, but also in particular when women and people of marginalized genders are doing the work. We have to acknowledge how issues of identity and history impact our goals and our field, and so that we can achieve this. Thank you. So I would like to thank the many women scientists and wonderful people, and sorry, Eileen, I don't think you would historian, who helped make this work possible. I also want to highlight the women who I believe should be famous for their research. Lauren, I don't have your picture here too, but Jean Mendel, Lauren Corfine, Marianella Casasola, Taylor McGuire, the Adolescent Transitions Laboratory, and the people in it. And I'd also like to thank the Summer Archival Fellowship Committee for letting me pursue this project and the paper that I hope will be published very soon. And I actually had this for my A exam, but I would still like to thank Flora Rose and Martha Van Rensselaer for their extraordinary vision. I can answer questions. I can also go through some miscellaneous finds from the archives. Yeah, okay. So one of the things when I first started looking through the archives is there were all of these clippings from a lot of it from the war, but things that involved home economics and what they studied. And it was very child focused. I like to see like what felt newsworthy during the time, and there was really wonderful focus on effects of children's health and well-being during the war and Cornell women. We see some early equality despite marriage. I'm gonna get married really soon, so I'm hoping. And equality with men goes in challenge in Finland. That's very cool. I'm sorry, this is egregious. But we also see some examples here of people leaving their work because of family issues, getting married, things like that. I came across a lot of letters that were kind of this nature. And then one of my favorite new quotes that I quote to myself is, "Moreover, world peace was not achieved." In their summary. Every year in my own personal journal, I wrote, "Moreover, world peace was not achieved." And as a child who every year for Christmas wished for a rabbit, if my parents are watching right now, you can tell them, a rabbit in world peace. This too would be my summary for the majority of my 29 years. And those are the kind of coolest things. I have so many pictures. I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures. So if you ever want to spend a rainy or a sunny afternoon, absolutely drenched in pictures and historical pieces, I'd be happy to do that. I've also, for general, like I have collected, our department recently threw out all of the physical copies of theses and dissertations until I took like 100 of them into our lab. Sorry, sorry, Jane. It's okay. Our office was like, "Do you want to take a few?" And they ended up loaning me an entire cart so I could take them back. I've just taken a few of them in case people want to leaf through them. They're very interesting and very cool. But other than that, I can take any questions or concerns.
You have a question?
Yeah.
So I was very intrigued by the curriculum in nursery school of like what they were learning each year. And as a person who graduated from Cornell's Human Development Department, I was wondering how your experience was as an undergrad and if you think it's become more psychology focused even in like 2016 before we merged, or if it was like more holistic and reflected what it was back then.
So absolutely, yeah, it's extremely psychology focused, and I think I would say that I think you get one of the kind of more recent changes and over the years, and I don't know who to blame for this, but sorry, human development departments became more psychology focused in general, doing really good human development informed work. But also there were less sociologists, I don't think anyone replaced Joan Brumberg as a historian. No one came after her. And selfishly, I really would have loved that. one of the things I kind of had to reckon with after I left Cornell is a lot of human development programs that still exist are very different from ours. They have different kind of traditions. One of the things I hope I don't get in trouble with eventually is the human development and family studies identity as the and family studies is very important. And there's a whole group of researchers who consider themselves family studies researchers and not human development researchers. Since we're at Cornell today, I use human development, but I want to also just like make a note that family studies identity is really kind of first in line for some HDFS professors.
There's a question from Nancy. How has the dropping of the family studies portion of the department affected the research here at Cornell? I felt it was a really critical part of the field.
No, that's a good question. I think some of it kind of relates to the larger themes of this talk, which is what do we associate when we think of family studies, right? Who's doing family studies research? And I think departments who usually drop the family studies name, it might have been because they wanted to increase that feeling of prestige, or we're doing human development research. So I think that's, in my opinion, I might not have felt this before this project, but I think it's definitely a loss. And looking at the kind of rich work that was done, specifically focusing on the family unit. But I think that was, I didn't focus too much on that for the purposes of my talk, but I could definitely take a look at that and kind of answer that question more clearly for you later. But I think these are often driven by administration decisions of what is kind of best for the future without looking at what is our responsibility as scholars to promote our existing work rather than renaming ourselves.
You go. Okay, well, you're going to have to help me find the question in this. But I couldn't help when you were talking about the contradictions of the words that were coming out of the mouths of the scholars about women's priorities being in the home, and these were scholars who were, you know, whose priorities were clearly their science and their scholarship. My mind drifted to an image of an actual United States senator sitting in a kitchen delivering a response to the State of the Union address. And I'm not sure what my question is.
Okay.
You have the question.
Speak to that.
Yeah.
Usual, Lauren, you and I are having a little bit of this moment. So for the first time, and I apologize if I'm hijacking this talk when I have the privilege of getting to talk to Kathleen so often. When you were talking about the post-war period, which is again what jumped out to Lauren, and the erosion of respect that happened particularly in that time period and the consequences that that had for departmental identity and departmental scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
I also made the parallel, and I might have the question here. Is there a parallel between what happened in the post-war period and attitudes towards women, their roles in society and their scholarship, and what is happening today that is currently affecting human development fields, their identity, and
God, I mean, that's such a good question.
To me, until I heard you.
You know, I'll have to talk to my mentor to undertake a project related to these things.
Manuscript you were writing on this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, and I think there's also the aesthetics of being in the home too. I'm gonna talk my way through this question because I have no idea how to answer it. But I think there's an increasing like the trad wives, the aesthetics of being a homemaker that is really misunderstanding what home economics work was doing and what it actually it was making women's lives easier. Eleanor Roosevelt didn't make the worst meals in the White House of all time for us to ignore the fact that a lot of it was on making meals easier to make, or like her cake mixes and things like that. But I think I do wonder, like, family studies and understanding the home and valuing, like the Lanham Act might be another kind of example of this. The Lanham Child Care Act to provide free child care across the country during the war. When it was disbanded after the war, Eleanor Roosevelt fought really hard to try to keep it in existence. And when I read the quote about children with ulcers because their mother isn't in the home. I'm wondering, is it that their mother wasn't in the home or they didn't have adequate social supports and their mother couldn't be in the home because of financial stressors? And so like using that home economics sort of lens and thinking about, oh, well, is this a public policy problem? Why are we, like one of the things that early home economics researchers did, I can't say economists again, was they acknowledged that there were policy decisions being made. The world was changing and being transformed, and that it wasn't like, it was a matter of like teaching people to be at home and do that work well. But also supporting them in the work that they were doing, not like sending them at home to make like Oreos from scratch, like your latest TikTok influencer, but providing the tools to make their lives easier and acknowledging that what they were doing was labor. And I think our current moment is kind of the reverse of that, where we're back to not acknowledging this labor of women or aestheticizing this labor back into the good old days. Did that answer your question? We have more to talk about, I'm sure.
No, actually, the aestheticizing, I love that point, and it took me immediately to if anybody studied a question for anyone. Is our media, and particularly social media, are they glorifying domesticity at the expense of other pursuits? And
Yes, I
or
think
domestic activities, cooking, child, like kid, like all of that. Is the research showing that?
this is such a good media. We should ask Brooke Duffy. But yes, there is so much of this is definitely Brooke Duffy in media studies, kind of her area, which is glamorizing that work in the home. There's the stay-at-home girlfriend life. That's not a financially secure place to be. There are no protections for you as a stay-at-home girlfriend. If there were, I would not I would be doing my work from Boulder. But we don't have these protections for women, and we don't really have protections for homemakers in the same way. And we do see efforts to try to make it from conservative lawmakers trying to make it harder for women to divorce their husbands and leave the home. These things feel front of mind when I'm thinking about what do human development researchers do. And it also calls to mind, I know someone who graduated from our lab and went on to do social work. And I asked her what the main difference between doing social work and doing clinical psych-oriented work was. And she goes, we don't pretend that politics don't matter. And I think there's a real opportunity here in human development. As we see the field transforming, it's filled with people who are making maybe career-safe choices in developmental psych research, not people who are doing interdisciplinary informed research that could taking on a responsibility as we are human development. We have agency in our field and we can advocate for our field and the policies that are affecting the research and the people that we are studying. I think that's a really rich opportunity, and I'm pre-tenure and pre-employed, so sure, it's on you. You, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. It was really exciting. I have a question. I guess this is a sort of historical, empirical question. Did the stuff that you reviewed give insight into the motives behind original attempts to rebrand or rename a lot of these departments? Is it that people were sort of chasing after funding that was more likely to go to a more prestigiously named department? Or is it?
Oh, sorry. I think, well, one thing I'd say is that human ecology, it was a new name. So I think in a lot of ways it might have been perceived as a fresh start. There were a lot of conversations around what it would be. I don't want to totally crib on someone else's talk, but there is a talk, 2009 talk by Gwen Kay that talks about the specific rebranding and renaming of home economics. And I do think it is kind of the burden of what would home economics be, and seeing decreased funding and departments that get washed away under home economics. So feeling a pressure to rebrand. But maybe Eileen can speak more to that.
Well, I think that if we're talking about the change from home ec to human ecology, it was also during the 60s.
Right.
So is that what you're talking about, or the department name changes, or both? I mean,
Both.
yeah, I mean, department name changes happen constantly in the college. But from home ec to human ecology, a lot of that's society, I think, what was happening.
And what is interesting, especially with home economics, is way back in some of the Lake Placid conferences, they had talked about naming it human ecology. So I think I do wonder if they still would have wanted to rebrand it if it was human ecology, because I think that term also would have then become loaded, and we'd be talking about hum ec classes rather than home ec classes, and maybe still dragging print bags.
Yeah, follow-up question. I'm trying to think through the timelines with this idea of rebranding and changing identity, especially centered around prestige. Is it the case that you said the influx of men into the department or men into the field took place after sort of repositioning these more sort of family studies or human development?
It depended on the department. I think it was in large, they were happening around the same time. I mean, Yuri Brofenbrenner came in 1948, kind of before that larger influx of men into departments. And I also think we see kind of slowly departments where men are the majority maybe finding it harder to find funding. And to Margaret Rossiter's point, that big influx was developmental psych researchers going into human development, and not other places in home economics. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone.